If you find yourself behind the cloak of shame, guilt, judgment, stigma, today's episode's for you. I want to welcome Meredith Eicher, who is a dear friend of over 10 years. She's been sober for over 13. She is funny, she is awe-inspiring, and she is oh so raw and real. We're going to dive deep into this conversation about shame and what it means for somebody who's dealing with substance use disorder and what it means for the family and the loved ones as we navigate. She is a business coach and consultant and held in very high regard in her industry. And she unlocks the door and has the courage to have the real conversations about what this disease means to her and what it means to so many others like her. If you are a loved one or a family member of someone who's dealing with substance use disorder, and you find yourself in the shadows of the shame, this judgment, the stigma, and the guilt of this disease, we have built a membership community just for you. Please come out of the shadows. Join a community that, in fact, will support you in navigating this disease. Please join us at voicesencourage.com/thrive. Well, I can't tell you all how excited I am to have Meredith Eicher on here today. She is one of my favorite people in the world. She is my Vistage buddy, and we met each other a little bit more than 10 years ago at very first beginning of our training as Vistage chairs, and it was connection from jump. And so we've been through a lot together, and I so wanted her to share her story of sobriety and just to be, completely raw and real about her own journey. And so welcome, Meredith. You know how much I love you, and now my audience gets to love you too.
Oh, so I'm grateful. I'm excited, probably a little silly, giddyish to get to chat with you about this. You and I over the years have talked from time to time about it, and we've deep dived at times. And I want to say that what I remember the most, and I get tears in my eyes thinking about it, because I can visualize myself. I was in my first 9 months of sobriety. If you remember, I had not even made a year yet. And the opening to this, what we call chair school or whatever they call it now, but it was an opening cocktail reception, if you remember.
Mm-hmm,
and it was in the bar, and which I'm well familiar with bars. I'm very comfortable there. However, at month 9 in sobriety, absolutely not as comfortable. So even though it had been 9 months, it's so much easier today than it was at the 9-month mark or at the 1-month mark. So anyway, that's where we met, in the bar. So isn't it ironic that almost 10 plus years later we would be having this conversation? So, and what I remember was about you was that you were as wound up tight as I was about what we were walking into, because we knew very little about what we were walking into. And as per usual, KL style, she had read all the emails and read all the details, and I had not. And I began to get panicked. She mentioned a few things. So what I do know is you created a space for me. You created a space of feeling I was okay. And I'll always be grateful for that. And our journey together has certainly been that, where it's been a creation of space. So
I'm
excited to talk about whatever we're going to talk about. So
and it's interesting that I wasn't even in the throes of what was going on with Sam at that point. And so 10 years later, it's remarkable how much both of our lives have changed so much. And I'm thrilled to be able to give you the platform to speak about your own journey from a high-level executive place. Meredith is a business coach and consultant. obviously runs mastermind groups. And I so respect, and she is held in really high regard from my perspective as a professional. And the other side of that is for both of us, actually, in different positions, is the shame of. And we were talking a little bit offline before we got on here, but I do think it is such a critical piece of the discussion for those who are dealing with substance use disorder, as well as those of us who love people. So if you would just kind of jump in on your story, from jump, and how you came to your decision of sobriety. And
so if I really take it from the beginning, and to your listeners and so forth, don't panic. I'm not going to start with my worst childhood nightmare at 5. But if I roll back to, let's just start just high school, I was not interested in drinking at all. Didn't have much interest in it. People were buying the beer illegal and that sort of thing. I might have had one beer in high school, very much, just not interested. I was a good girl, if you will, which was the term used at that point in time. Rolling into college, as unlikely event of me being in flannel shirt and overalls and some sandals, I joined a sorority, which is somewhat of a big network, big social network in our area. And even throughout that time span where I was actually president, I got drunk 3 times in college. I remember all 3. So my journey, if you will, then into professional life, I was that one that it was kind of cool that, your coworkers would go out for a drink and I would have 1 glass of blush at the time, Chablis or whatever it's called. And my point in bringing that forward is that really up until my early to mid 30s, I was not a drinker. Wasn't interested in it, didn't think about it, had 1 or 2 here or there, not much. However, as I began to grow my accounting and tax practice, as took on a partner, and then it wasn't just 1 employee, I was now at 10 employees. And the pressures of growing a business, wearing all the caps, all the different hats you wear as a business owner in a partnership, growing a business, it began to heighten. I remember being into a martini and thinking, oh man, boy, does this ease the pain? And had never really thought of alcohol like that, if you will, which is interesting. I think now upon reflection, a holic type behavior can show up in different forms. So I think up until that point, and even on, and it shows up now, that excessive behavior can show up in other areas of your life, if you will. For me, obviously, it showed up in work. If I do something, I do it full on, all out. And that's what the drinking became. And it was probably somewhere about 7 or 8 years into it that I knew in my heart of hearts that I was drinking too much. Not so much, it wasn't during the day to affect work product as it was, if you will, in the evening, afternoon. It was such a social way of life. It became meet clients out. Then it was an excuse to drink was to meet clients out. Then the whole reasoning for it changed.
Right.
Where you began to, oh, well, if I meet people out, then I can drink. Then it became creating activity that allowed for drinking. Crazy, right? And that's the obsession piece, I believe, if you will. And so for 2 or 3, probably even 4 years, I knew. And I would think, like so many stories you hear, oh, I'm only going to drink on the weekends. I'm not going to drink till after 6. And that would last, ever so shortly. But during that period of time, here's the key point, and given the build up to it is the shame. The shame that began to build. It began to accumulate. And you started, little things started happening, like backing into a light pole in your friend's driveway and playing it off, but yet in my own awareness, knowing that the pole didn't jump out. I've been in that driveway a bazillion times. I'd had too much to drink.
Yeah.
Or showing up at a Christmas party and being, the make grand entrance. And those little things that I had the awareness of, and it was just piling the shame in the shame bucket. I felt like I was wrapped in a blanket, if you will, of shame around it. And I think that the shame puts off us getting help. It deters it. And I can remember one day in my office, the next morning, dehydrated, of course, that's how you get shakes, by the way, and picking up the phone and calling the local AA office. And I didn't know what to say. I was like, hey, how do you know? And I remember the lady saying, no, when you know, you know. And I was like, okay, thanks. And put my head right back in the sand. So interesting to the whole story is maybe one friend or two friends might have said, hey, you better tone it down. And I was like, yeah, the usual. I'm fine. And family-wise, nobody said anything, which is interesting. Well, in my family dynamic, maybe not so, and not as surprising. It wasn't talked about. And then one day, my dad did say to me, baby, I'm worried about you. You're working a lot. Come in like you're coming in tonight. He lived with me. I'm worried about you. That's all he said. And that definitely planted a seed, sort of. The truth was, what it did was it made me take my head out of the sand because I was avoiding the shame.
Right.
So the shame looks like, well, that means I've got to tell somebody. If I got to tell somebody, then I'm not that all together, put together business owner, president of this, president of that, high achiever. All my clients love me. It's like the armor comes off. Who's going to know? This is all of that. I mean, physically right now, thinking about what I was going through at that point, just the churn of that. And so one day, and there was a defining event, of course, at my home, my niece showed up unannounced, and there were a group of us sitting around eating and drinking, and I was pretty tuned up, and she saw that.
Yeah.
And I probably had, I don't remember, been told that I made some pretty choice comments about her father. And so that completely destroyed my relationship with her, my public identity with her, my fabulous aunt identity with her.
Yeah.
And that was a shame turning point. I mean, that shame was just something I couldn't get past. And so I made a phone call, ironically, to a client whose password was his sobriety date on the computer. So on his books or what have you. And so I called him up and I said, you remember that day you told me that your sobriety date was your password? Like, how did you get a sobriety date? I didn't know anything about how that worked. And so, which is very interesting because there's a story as a child that my mother used to sponsor AA meetings at the prison, the women's prison, which is interesting. So that's a whole nother. So there are a lot of crisscrossy little threads. So I don't know if I'm talking too much here, Gail.
No. So what was the first step beyond calling your client and asking, what about this sobriety date?
Well, he said, what you need to do, you're not going to like. And you're a strong personality and you're going to push back. And he said, you go to an AA meeting. And I went, Jesus, I cannot go to an AA meeting, for God's sake. And before I could get it out of my mouth, he said, you'll know somebody in the room. I'm like, oh, hell, not just no, but hell no, I ain't doing that. One of my clients see me, and I think that I've come to learn that that is not an uncommon thought, particularly by us. And so he said, don't worry, I'll go with you. There's one Friday night. Well, Friday he calls and says, I am so sorry, I cannot go with you. I was like, man. But I was aware enough to know, I had the awareness that to get out of the shame, to get out of where I was, I had to take action. Phone call wasn't going to do it. Reading a book wasn't going to do it.
Yeah.
So incidentally, the day before, I went to the bookstore and I whispered to the lady, I said, is there some big book, blue? I called it the blue book. It's called the big book. But anyway, and she yells it across the store. Another good reason that I did not want to go to a meeting on that Friday night, might I mention. It's like, hey, where's the AA? Where's the Alcoholics Anonymous books? I'm like, man. So in any event, that being said, my friend bails out. I still go. And sure enough, I sat down, looked straight across the room, and there was somebody I knew. And there was still shame. And yet I was relieved that I was sitting in the chair.
Yeah.
So, and I'm smart enough to know, and I remember thinking this at the time, that the way that we make consistent, positive change in our lives is we do it in community.
Yes.
We do it in it can be called a million different things, in your tribe, within your family, with a best buddy. It's the buzzword today is accountability. I like to think it's that we're human beings and we have the need for other people. We have a need to be accepted, a need to be loved, all in that area. And when we can be in community and making change and be accepted in that change that we're making, the more powerful it is.
Yeah. Well, community is 95% of the game, I think. And obviously being super choiceful about the community that you decide to, embrace you, and the connections that allow you to be your true, genuine, authentic self. It is a courageous step to want to find others. And sometimes it takes some trial and error.
Sure. And I would say that people do it different ways. AA may not be for everyone. It may be a counselor. It may be someone that they can just talk to. I think that it's whatever works. At that point, I was desperate to do something before I did something stupid.
Yeah.
Get a DWI, hurt someone.
Right.
What I had done, what I know about myself, my integrity is so important to me. And I was now very much out of integrity with my niece. And probably a lot of people that didn't have the balls to say anything to me.
Right.
At the end of the day. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
As we all know, we're judgment making machines. And there are times where we cock our heads and go, God, they drink a lot, or they ate about 15 cookies there. We make comments in our head. We have a conversation going on in our head.
Yeah.
And it could be about somebody we care about, deeply, and we don't have the conversation.
Right. Yeah.
And we're afraid we'll hurt them and it'll ruin our relationship and all those things.
So what are the 3 to 5 things that have been absolutely, besides community, been absolutely mission critical for you to maintain your sobriety? And yeah, let's go with that.
3 to 5 things mission critical have been to be honest about it, to handle it, to be honest, and that can take in different ways. I think for different people and different personalities. I think.
Well, how did it look for you? So
the way it looked for me was I had to speak it. To speak it to me was to own it and to honor it. So there was by speaking it, I owned it and I honored myself. So, and this is what it looked like in the beginning. You know, when I would walk into Ruth Chris Steakhouse, where they're fabulous at keeping up with exactly what you drink and damn near putting it at your seat before you sit down. I can remember that first day and the, hey, you still want your blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I've given up my career. My professional drinking career has come to an end. So for me, that looked like a way that I would speak it, or if there was a time where I said, hey, having a drink just doesn't work for me anymore. And that could start a conversation, not start a conversation. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, there's different ways. And then there's just sometimes, no, I don't want to drink. Much more comfortable with that today than I was in the beginning, obviously.
Sure. Yeah.
So that would be one. I think that you have to speak it and own it and honor it in a way. I think for me, the other thing that's worked is having, I have a go-to person, which in the AA world is referred to as a sponsor. She and I laugh today. We don't even look at each other like that. We are very dear, good friends. And you've got that person. Mm-hmm. So you have a go-to. I think also the community piece is important.
Yeah.
The community piece for me looks a little different. Obviously, in the first several years, it was regular meeting. But now it's more like you and I can have a conversation around it. I can have in my CEO groups, it's been amazing what me being able to speak it, own it, honor it, and they're able to come to me. And that's another form of, it's a community where you can. So yeah. I think, for me, community, being able to have those key people around me, I think being of service to others has helped tremendously. Being able to have the space for one of my clients to say, man, Meredith, how did you know you're drinking too much? Being able to be of service when I ask them every year about their blood work, just health-wise, and being able to have a conversation when they say my liver enzymes are off the chart and my doctor doesn't like it. So I think that being of service, there's not anybody that can call me at any time if it is around an alcohol or drug issue that I won't jump up and drop what I'm doing, bar none, go help. Because when people finally make the call,
right,
this is what is so key. When they finally make the call, they got from under the shame blanket, or as someone once said to me, when you've suffered enough, you'll do something about it. When they finally make that call, it is imperative that somebody's there for them.
Right.
And if I say, well, yeah, let me finish this meeting and I'll meet you right after work. No. It means go then, because 1 hour from now, their mind could change.
Right. I think that's one of the things that was somewhat difficult for me in the early years with Sam, was him saying, I'm going to do this, and then not following through. And so, really understanding the disease and how it changes your brain, but also the mental gymnastics that go on. And that notion of what you just spoke to was, look, that could change in 5 minutes. And particularly when they're making the first reach for help.
Yeah.
Because they've just stuck their toe out of the shame blanket that blanket is still super heavy. And I think about it not only in relation to your journey, but in relation to my journey and to those of us who love people. Actually, in some ways, I think it's bizarre, but we're more shameful about the ones that we love that are dealing with the disease. We're ashamed that they're dealing with the disease. And so that's another reason why Voices Encouraged got born, was because I needed to do all the things that you talked about in terms of telling my story, telling my truth, speaking it out loud, and doing all of those things that you just talked about has been part of my journey too.
I think it's just deeply interesting. The shame blanket gets worn on both sides.
Yes, it does.
Because as a parent, the judgment and the, oh, it'll never happen to my son, or, oh, there's something sort of broken and defective about that family because
you can't control your kid. What's wrong with you?
Oh,
you can't fix your kid. What's wrong with you?
Sure.
What the heck is going on in your family? And it is steep, which is remarkable because those who speak that, they got their own stuff going on.
Absolutely. I think a couple of things. I think that I'm blessed or just was so lucky to have gone to a personal development workshop that helped me become self-aware and look in the mirror.
Yeah.
And I maybe wasn't ready to talk about it until I was ready to talk about it or do something about it. How many of us don't have that awareness, and they don't realize, and then we don't have the awareness that it's going on right in front of us.
Yeah.
And then there's all the reasons when you do have the awareness that you don't want to talk about it for all those things, fear of failure, fear of rejection, emotional discomfort, all of those things.
Right.
So
that little voice of awareness, keeps trying to be heard, and that the voices of shame and judgment and stigma are really strong. And say, I think that's partly where this mental gymnastics resides. You're almost like, yes, I am. No, I'm not. Yes, I am. No, I'm not. You're having this, discussion in your own head. It's a bit crazy making.
Well, it is. We talk about it. It's the conversation that you have in your own mind. And we say, oh, well, I'm not really. I mean, I didn't have that many. We play the justification in our heads. And then we're like, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to do something. Oh, but you've got 5 meetings this week and tax season and. I mean, all of that.
Right.
So I think even if you have the awareness, then there's something that pops up that will get in our way. Obviously the shame, and who knows what else. So my objective in my world, in all aspects of who I am and what I do, is to always create a space for people to be able to say what needs to be said.
Yeah.
And whether that looks like, Meredith, I got taken for $4 million and I've got to explain it to my owner. I was, to Meredith, I'm drinking a Red Bull and a vodka every day to work. I've got to be able to create that place where those conversations can be had. Yeah.
Well, you and I talk about and actually train and coach on how to hold the space, which is that space of, leaving judgment at the door and advancing with compassion and empathy and love, because we each have our own demons, our own stories, and that, kind of check us at the door of being able to drop the mask.
And that is what it's about. It's the mask, it's the armor, Brene Brown refers to it as the armor. And she talks about it in a leadership way. And she also talks about her own shame and armor around sobriety. And I think that, at the end of the day, we all want to be accepted. We all want to be loved, liked, all in that little arena. We want to be part of the tribe. And oftentimes we find ourselves in a group or in a neighborhood of people or in an organization or could be any one of those things or in a family unit where it's not okay.
Right.
It's not okay to fill in the blank. Forget the legality of it. That's not really what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about the acceptance of it. And so when we're not, whatever it is,
right,
except, as you well know, I have a great deal of shame and for years and years and years around my physical appearance. I mean, that shame was beyond belief.
Right.
And so, fill in the blank. It doesn't have to be alcohol. It can be overeating. It can be gambling. It can be, God, I love that ball. I love that line of cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
Name whatever it is. And we will do everything imaginable to fit in. Because we need to thrive on connection.
Yes. Yeah. And, I've thought more about this recently because you and I are in very similar spaces relative to the work that we do in the world. How, at least I'm going to speak for me, is I've built a business of connection. Every part of my business is about connecting genuinely and authentically. And so it's me taking my own power to create my calling in a way where I can drop that mask. I can be vulnerable. I can tell my truth. And everybody that I work with, which are all, CEOs and C-suite execs and all of it, can do the same.
Yes. I mean, there's deep pain in walking around not being your authentic self.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, I don't know where the consciousness level is at this point in terms of how many people are walking around trying to be somebody for other people that they are not.
I think it's I think the numbers are astounding is what I would say.
Yeah.
Recently in one of my groups, one of my roundtables, I read a quote or a little passage, if you will, and it was about people judging you or holding you, looking at you, caring about what other people thought about you. And we had a discussion in each of the groups around, well, what comes up for you when we talk about don't worry about what other people think?
That's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I can make an argument either, both ends of the spectrum here.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a discussion about, well, it does matter what my boss thinks. It does matter what my mom thinks. Yes, it depends on who it is. And then we talked about, well, how is it that you really do let go internal chatter of what other people will think, which is great basis of shame, which is what our underlying conversation here is. And I said, well, I think the antidote is how authentic you are, that you can be you and be comfortable in being you. Mm-hmm. And the tribe, the whatever that accepts you in that way, well, that's where you're the most comfortable. But if I'm in a scenario, whether it be a company, an organization, a friend group, and I'm having to be somebody I'm not, it's, That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, the way that I think about it is a bit soul severing. And those times when you meet somebody and you get the very distinct impression that you're looking at a mask and a facade, and there's this moment of awareness that you make a decision, who am I going to be in this moment?
That's right. That's exactly right. And sometimes, of course, we justify, well, to get the business, I'd better show up like this.
Right.
And God forbid if they ever found out that I go to AA, or God forbid if they find out I've been to jail. God forbid, it's,
Yeah, I'm curious to know what your perspective is, because my journey has been more, I'm approaching 70, and I've gotten more and more to the point where
you look good.
Thank you.
You look good. Okay.
I love you. And I've gotten to the point now where it's not that I don't care, it's that I care less. I think that I'm not going to not be who I truly am because of somebody else and whatever story they bring to the table. I don't have enough time left to play that game, nor do I have the desire.
Well, exactly what we're talking about. My dad used to say, as he was getting older, and he lived with me till he was 92 when he died. And he said, basically, baby, I just don't give a damn. And you'll understand it as you get older. Because I was good, Dad, for God's sakes, don't say that. He would say something, I'd grab his arm like, you can't say that, Dad, or, or Dad, that's what you're wearing, or he'd light a cigar in a no smoking place. I don't know how much of that was his reverence for authority, or that as you get older.
Right.
So when you say those things, that's what it makes me think about. That's why it's where's the balance.
Yeah.
Because I have to be true to myself that I'm okay and it's okay that I choose not to drink. It's okay. The more grounded we are in ourselves and believe in ourselves, the bigger offer we are in a room, I believe.
Hands down, 100% in agreement with you. And, you and I have big reach in the world. And we both take this seriously in a genuine and authentic way in how we do our reach.
Yes, I very much agree with that. In 2000, so within the 5-year time period of getting sober, went to a workshop and we developed our purpose statement, if you will. And I've re-looked at it several times over the last, 24 months to 9 years, 15 years, I guess, whatever. And mine is to empower others to believe in themselves. And when we believe in ourselves, to thy own self be true, all the different ways that line is repeated.
Right.
That's when that's when we can operate, empower, influence, achieve all that we choose. And sometimes that means we have to be willing to manage that which does not serve us. Drinking would be one for me.
Yeah. And I would say going through this experience with Sam, because, Sam's not the only one in my life. My mom was addicted to prescription medications. My brother was a cocaine addict. I married an alcoholic, Vietnam vet. And so this has been, I think, in so many ways for me, certainly a lifelong journey. And I think all those people along the way have been my greatest teachers to be able to step into the power of being able to hold the space for those who are suffering with this disease, and learning, quite frankly, how to love with healthy boundaries, and learning how to speak my truth about loving those that I love, and my own journey in figuring myself out in the midst of all of this. I mean, you've been very much in the last, 7, 8 years present in my own evolution of this journey with Sam. And so I think it's one of the reasons why I feel so connected to you is because you have seen me at my lowest and you have seen me at my highest and all the stuff in between. And I feel so blessed.
Thank you. I feel the same way. I'm watching my friend on a TED Talk stage. Oh my God. Or a TEDx. And I also know to do that, you have to be incredibly grounded, and to stand on the sidewalk with your son in psychosis, you have to be incredibly grounded. And to me, I kind of was pinching myself with the TEDx deal because I'm like, man, this is who this person's in my world. This is a go-to person. So I think that the feeling is mutual. For sure. And this venue that we're talking about or this space that you've created to have these conversations, it makes a difference because perhaps out of this conversation, one person might get the courage to have a conversation with someone around whatever the fill in the blank is.
Right. And what I would say also is that my ability and my courage to stand on a TEDx stage and deliver that is only because of you and Ken and Silva and Callie and Patty and the community that I have surrounded myself with that all hold the space for me to be able to deliver my truth. And that is really at the basis of what we're talking about here.
And I really believe, KL, that one of the messages is looking around and seeing who those people are for you. Or, for whoever's listening. I can remember my mom, as you well know, died when I was 14. She beat into my head, company you keep is very important. And I used to think, that sounds so snotty. And for God's sake, your underwear better not have a hole in it, that you might get in a wreck. And what would they think? But my point in saying that, isn't it interesting that really what she was talking about is who you surround yourself with are the people that you take the journey with and support you in your journey. And that's who you're supposed to be around.
Right. Yeah. And, obviously in the business world, we talk about making sure you're hiring a good fit culturally for your companies, and it's the same thing for friends. And you can't always, obviously you can't pick your family, but you can choose the distance you keep from the ones that, don't.
Right. That's right. That's right.
Hold the best version of who you are. Yeah. So I think it's really interesting. It's like these threads of wisdom coming through the ages, and truly who we surround ourselves with is who we become. And be super choiceful about that because it will determine the quality, the character, the integrity, and the successes of your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think about at the height of my drinking, I surrounded myself with people that thought going to Ruth Chris at 3:00 on a Friday afternoon was a good idea. Might have been a good idea for them, but it surely wasn't a good idea for me. But my point is that we sometimes fall into what may not best serve us. And the power of intentionality. And so to bring it back full circle, the power of intentionality to make the phone call, to be in conversation with people, to be in community with people, to be in service. When you're in service with people, you're with like-minded people.
Right.
And then you're able to live without the armor and the mask because you surround yourself and you become the best version.
Yeah.
So, and I got you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we're at the edge of our time together, which, of course, you and I could talk forever. And I just want to say that I'm so, deeply grateful for who you are in my life and for this conversation, because I think, we've peeled back layers here, and gone to a depth that I don't know how often people get to do this or listen to it. And so, kind of on behalf of me and my audience, I just want to say, you always exceed my expectations in friendship and in life, and certainly on this podcast today. So deep gratitude for you, Meredith. You are a remarkable human being in the world.
I love you big, big, my friend. And if I also was sitting here thinking, oh my God, I wasn't very politically correct or with my language on here. If I'd have done it different, I wouldn't have shown up as me. So how about that?
Yeah, no, you is great.
So I love you big. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This was therapeutic for me. You know how I started the call. So this shifted me in just a way that, as always, you bring to the table. So thank you for the space and creating it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome.
My deep, deep gratitude to Meredith Eicher for joining us today. She has broad reach and has impacted so many lives, and her ability to get right at what matters most in terms of shame and guilt and judgment and really transcend it is what today's episode has been about. It's a must listen to. Thank you, Meredith.